Hi everyone, Jordan Bateman here. Welcome to the final BC Poly Hotstove of 2018. Don't get your hopes up, Adrian Dix. We're coming back in 2019. You better believe we are. I'm Jordan Bateman. I am the Vice President of Communications and Marketing for the Independent Contractors and Business Association and a contributing writer. Next year I want to get promoted to contributing editor of the Orca.
Promotions all around, and congratulations on the new title.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yes, it looks great on a business card, and man, is my mom is like glowingly proud, like vice president. I'm also going to go see Vice over the Christmas break to learn how to be an evil vice president. So it'll be great.
So you got a good head start.
It'll be good. It'll be good. And joined as always, of course, by Maclean K, editor-in-chief of the Orca, BC's best and newest. Can I say best? Why not?
You can still say best, absolutely.
It's our own Facebook page. What are they going to do? Fight us?
Well, exactly. And to everyone watching, cover your ears. Ben Isett, Merry Christmas.
Oh, poor Ben Isett. You've triggered him. He's going to be crying forever. All right. Well, here at BC Poly Hotstove, we like to recap the week that was in politics, starting with our front burner issue. And Maclean, the front burner issue is one near and dear to our hearts at ICBA. And the NDP have screwed it up again. Please tell me about the Massey tunnel bridge that never was.
Well, where to begin? I mean, as you know, that was one of the last major projects announced by the previous BC Liberal government. And if somehow you're not familiar with the problem, the Massey Tunnel was built early in the reign of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And I mean very early. I think it was 1954 or something like that. And it's just not up to the task anymore to getting traffic to and from the Lower Mainland and south of the Fraser. And not only is it a major traffic choke point, it's also frighteningly unsafe. Seismically. The short version is basically in an earthquake, it floods and everyone in it will die. That's not an exaggeration.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that, Maclean. It floods and then it cracks and it dislodges from the ocean floor or the river floor, and then it kind of floats or tumbles down into the sea. Like, honestly, of all the government reports I've ever read, that was the most terrifying. And every time I drive into a bloody tunnel now, I think of it.
That's the only government report that could be a movie starring Dwayne Johnson.
It should be
rated
rated
the best spin you can put on that.
Rated PG-13 because yikes! Do not be in the tunnel in an earthquake, please, people.
So again, the short version is after the election, the NDP canceled the project, saying, well, basically just saying they were going to cancel it. And then I guess we're 16 months later, and earlier this week, Transportation Minister Claire Trevena issued a press release saying, join me for an announcement and a technical briefing, which usually means there's something happening. And we're thinking, okay, finally, we're at least going to see what their version of how to proceed is. No. What we're seeing instead is they've released an independent report on the options for getting traffic across or underneath the Fraser River. The originally planned bridge would have, even the report admitted, done a great job of alleviating the traffic snarls. But there are other considerations like livability, which is not defined to anyone's satisfaction, but apparently was a good enough reason to cancel this project. And so now another round of consultations.
Yeah,
with mayors, with First Nations. Yeah, the optimistic plan is a business plan by 2020 and possibly construction in, coincidence, 2021, which just happens to be an election year.
Yeah, look, talking to our folks who actually build these kind of projects, and we're handling preload and things like that, they say optimistically 7 years. A 7-year delay from today. And you're damning 80,000 people a day to sitting in that traffic over and over again.
And I mean, not only does it cost just a frightening amount of time for commuters and people trying to get to and from the ferry terminal or things like that, the airport, but also, I mean, there's this hopefully will be near and dear to the NDP and Green Hearts. There's a lot of emissions of cars that are stuck in traffic that could be better spent towards actually getting people to where they're trying to go. And of course, the story just keeps getting better or worse, depending on your perspective, because yesterday, London Drugs, which is based in Richmond, said, you know what? I don't know why, but that's it. Our employees have been extremely patient with long commutes to and from work every day, and it's a significant problem with us shipping our product. And so we're actually going to look at moving our headquarters out of Richmond. And this is serious.
Yeah.
This is people's jobs and lives.
Yeah. 50% of their employees, they have about 900 at their distribution center and headquarters. 50% come from south of the Fraser and have to use that tunnel. And they say they've lost, their CEO says they've lost many staff over it. I don't doubt them. You hear it all the time. And this is where Malcolm Brodie needs to be, singled out as one of the worst mayors in the region, a mayor who has just squandered a 10-lane bridge that would have modernized one half of the connections into his community. And he's going to drive business out of his community. And frankly, I say London Drugs, move on out, Surrey, Delta, Langley. We all stand with open arms to welcome you and your distribution center and your hundreds of jobs and your tax base. Feel free to leave Malcolm Brodie behind. The same mayor who used to rail against the Canada line, by the way, now has, for some reason, a veto over the NDP policy when it comes to the Massey Bridge.
I mean, it goes to show how people often vote differently municipally and provincially, because Richmond is very solid BC Liberal territory too. So I mean, it's hard to see what's going on there in City Hall.
Yeah, well, it's easy to see what's going on from the NDP's point of view. Here's what I think has really happened. I think they know they have a problem with the Massey Bridge. I think they know that there are swing ridings that want that bridge. I mean, look, Richmond-Queensborough is essentially a swing riding. Jazz Johal, an outstanding MLA, but only won by, I think, 83, 85 votes, something like that.
Yep.
It was thin. But they've put it on the back burner because, frankly, they've spent all their money. You look at the Patello Bridge, which, by the minister's own estimate, it will be 7% more expensive than necessary thanks to their union monopoly. We believe it'll be more like 25 to 30% more expensive based on the Island Highway model. They've spent, that $100 million or 150 million or 200 or 250 million, whatever that final price tag is that they're paying more for their union buddies. That's a pretty nice down payment on a bridge over the Massey or replacing the Massey tunnel. So, it's. I'd say irksome, but it's more than irksome. It's not just a traffic issue or an inconvenience issue. It's not just an economic issue. It is a safety issue. And to say there hasn't been consultation when there have been 150 meetings with TransLink and regional mayors, and thousands of responses to various consultations over the years, and 20,000 pages worth of documentation. Like, this thing has been studied to death. There is no study on earth that will reveal anything new about this problem. It just has to be fixed.
Well, and the NDP's problem is that it was a transparently political decision. There was no sort of compelling safety or even, a First Nations relations kind of issue here. This was purely we have to cancel some BC Liberal projects, and this project was the first one because they felt their hands were tied on things like Site C and LNG, so something had to go. And because it was such a nakedly and transparently political decision, they're going to have to live with the political ramifications.
Yeah, and blew $100 million worth of preload and all of that other work that's gone on before. But yeah, it's really disappointing. Massey is, like we said, it's a safety issue. I found the most nonsensical part of her presentation was when Claire Trevina tried to list off all of the ways they were going to enhance safety. They're going to wash the tunnel. And I know she's got a British accent and whatnot, but it just sounded so condescending. We're going to wash the tunnel, and we're going to light the tunnel, and we're going to remove pooling water from the tunnel. Like, oh my God! Like honestly, Minister, you look so out of touch. And I posted a Twitter link to Bob Mackin's story showing that 32 kilometers of Quadra Island got paved, including the road to the minister's house. Within days or within weeks or months of her becoming minister. I got to tell you, the Massey Bridge, Massey Tunnel, a whole lot more bigger concern, safety issue, and impacts a whole lot more people than this magical paving of Quadra Island. So.
I can tell you, you almost felt badly for her having to sell this, but they've made their bed.
Yeah, look, well, she's the one leading the charge. And first of all, she made us wait 6 months to see this stupid report in the first place. Just sat on her desk as she analyzed it. Which somehow the media managed to do in 6 hours. Provide pretty interesting analysis, including Les Lane, pointing out that road pricing is still in the mix. And you think of those pictures, Trevina, Horgan, all the Surrey MLAs, those swing ridings, grinning behind their little sign, toll-free BC. I think that's going to come back to haunt them, and I can already see the negative ads that the Liberals can roll out when they realize that, or when the public realizes that Joey McPhail is driving the mobility pricing bus and road taxes are on their way. So, yes, the Massey. All right. Also on the front burner, prop rep. We should know a result here shortly. According to, I think it was Zussman reported that there has been a count done. They are now auditing the results. It could come as soon as today or tomorrow. It might be the 27th or 28th.
Yeah, I think at this point, if it was going to be today, we would know by now. It's tomorrow or it's the week between Christmas and New Year's at this point.
Yeah, either way, not great timing as this goes. But, David Eby didn't care about timing. He cared about trying to rig it to win this vote. We're with the TransLink referendum, we were given 24-hour notice by Elections BC that the results would be out. I suspect they'll follow the same model because it seemed to work. Yeah. It also hypes it up for 24 hours. And, Elections BC, while not a political organization, certainly does love lots of press. And, it's always good to remind people why they exist, right? So, you think,
and that's why they're not going to do this on New Year. On Christmas Eve.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I can't imagine they would do it Monday because that would just be a public relations disaster. So so maybe tomorrow, maybe the 27th or 28th. Maclean, you and I have not made predictions. No. But now is the time. I got my pen out. I'm writing it down. Maclean K, what will be the vote on the first question?
Wow. I think everyone agrees that this vote is going to be extremely close. The widest swing I've seen anyone that I respect say but they said 55-45, and I think that's wildly either pessimistic or optimistic, depending on your point of view. I think we're looking at like a 52-48, 51-49, and at that point, it's almost a pick'em. I read with great interest Mike McDonald's piece on the numbers, and he seems to think that on balance, it favors a narrow no win, and I agree with him. But again, when we're talking about numbers this close,
yeah, Maclean, I'm going to break it to you. Having read all these different analyses, it seems like most first past the post people think they narrowly won, and most prop rep people think they narrowly won. So it's all just garbage, anyways. So Maclean, what am I putting down? 51.5 to 48.5 for what?
I'm going to say, boy. I want to say no, but there's a large part of me that feels like this is a mess we're going to be dealing with for a few years. So I'll be the contrary one and say that the yes win will win a extremely narrow vote on the first question.
On the first question, okay. Now on the first question, here's what I think. I think if there is going to be any kind of large gap, I don't see it on the prop rep side. I see it on the first past the post side. If first past the post wins 54-46, that would be significant given the parameters or given the polling. I just don't see that same kind of gap materializing for the prop rep side. Here's what I think. I think the BC Liberals very quietly did a very strong job fighting this thing on the ground in their ridings. And I look at Surrey and I see the BC Liberal riding turnout sometimes twice as high as the NDP riding turnout.
Which is remarkable.
Which is remarkable, but I think also does speak to David Eby's little pet project here. He did a crappy job at trying to reach out to ethnic voices, people maybe who don't speak English as their first language or read English as their first language. My suspicion is, unfortunately, this is a very English-centric, Eurocentric voting group that has cast ballots on this just because the materials weren't available. I mean, they were available on the website, but then you had to go to the web. Like, it was a hard step to get there, and I'm not sure many ethnic voters would have done it. That said, though, Richmond looks pretty good, turnout-wise. I'm talking myself in circles here as I make a prediction. I'm going to say you're 51.5, 48.5 for PR. I'm going to say Bill Thielman gets back in the winning column on referenda, because let's not forget, Maclean, I did beat him on TransLink.
You did.
I'm going to say 53% first past the post.
Wow.
So,
well, I mean, it's no secret that's how I hope things go. But as I say, I'm basing this on nothing more than just a funny feeling that this is a file we're going to have to deal with for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, you do live on Vancouver Island, though, so you might be
That's
skewed in
true.
your perception. You live in the bubble. Out here in the real world.
Point well taken.
Yeah, or beyond hope, as Bob Price would call it. There is maybe it's a little different. Look, I also have this nagging feeling simply because I don't feel like our side gets nice things anymore. Like that, it's that Clinton campaign from 2016 where I forget what book it was, but Robbie Mook was like always predicting the worst that would happen because their side doesn't get nice things. I feel a little bit like we're in that. However, I have seen these BC Liberals start to come to life. There's some decent poll numbers. Like I'm starting to wonder if the NDP circus is starting. People are wanting to start to pack up and move along. So, anyways, we'll do it. Any prediction? Look, the polls say the MMP seems to be way ahead. You think they get on the first ballot or the first count or the second count?
Well, probably the second count, just because, the first one has to be 50%. But apparently the polls indicate that is at least in play. So, it's fair to say that if the yes side wins the first question, we're almost certainly looking at some form of mixed member as the next form. Now, again, I say some form of, because there are so many details to be sorted out after the fact.
Oh, the Electoral Boundaries Commission is going to sort them all out, right? Right, Maclean? The Premier told me that, right, Maclean?
That's what they keep saying.
All of them, right?
And it's no more true.
Oh, can't believe you lied to me.
I did ask both Andrew Wilkinson and Andrew Weaver for their predictions. Andrew Weaver, actually, I didn't even ask him. He gave it to me unprompted. He said 52-48 yes. And then I told Andrew Wilkinson about Weaver's prediction, and his response was, and I quote, "Andrew Weaver is full of bombastic statements. I'm not like that. I will not make a prediction."
Oh. God, a little bit of bombast isn't terrible, Wilkinson. Cheapers. So basically, you've just ripped off Andrew Weaver's prediction because he was so magnetic. He's convinced you that is what's going to happen.
No, you know what? He had to predict yes, I think, no matter what.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But I do want to talk about this when we talk about our interview shortly. But he was very much distancing himself from PR. With me, I'm just, as you say, I'm right here in the belly of the beast on Vancouver Island, and I'm also something of a pessimist. And I just don't. I feel like I'm going to be flipping and writing about PR for a while. It's just a weird, funny feeling I have.
Yeah, I'm hoping it clears out. ICBA has, of course, the court challenge. January 21st, we're in court. Either way, if this thing has been defeated, Prop Rep's been defeated, we're still going to consider our options because there's some free speech implications around having an attorney general just unilaterally decide that a campaign period can be 5 months and therefore people can't advertise during that time. That's an important issue that we may end up litigating anyways. But definitely if this thing goes through, there's enough evidence, we believe, that this thing has been rigged. It was not a fair fight. The Premier made false statements on several occasions in promoting it. We'll be in court in January fighting it tooth and nail. Okay, allegedly made false statements. Well, they were false. He didn't explain the system right. He said electoral boundary commissions. They were demonstrably false. You don't like it, don't at me. Okay, back burner. Let's talk about your year-end interviews. I've read your one with Dr. Weaver. I've seen is the Wilkinson one posted? Yeah, I've seen a preview.
It is just shortly before we went live, so it's up now on the Orca.ca.
Excellent. And what did you discover sitting down with the two Andrew W's?
The two Andrew W's. Well, they're two. just completely different people and different experiences. We did
they're like bizarro versions of each other, right? Because they're both smart
in so many ways. Yeah,
like Superman and Bizarro, they both have the same power set, but they just like completely different.
And I'm not alone in remarking on this here in the press gallery. Is that when you ask Andrew Wilkinson a question, he gives you the answer to your question and then stops talking. It's all, and I don't mean this in a dismissive way. He's very disciplined and it's important, but it's all sort of measured in clips. Whereas with Andrew Weaver, my God, you just ask him a question and he talks, and it's great for mining nuggets of gold. But it also meant that there was no way I could print a Q&A format because it would have been 5,000 words, and I'm not exaggerating. And he was. Someone asked me based on the piece whether my interview with Weaver was tense. It wasn't tense at all. Not in the slightest, actually. He was very free with his answers, and he laughed a few times. We were happy to disagree on a couple of things, but there was no tension there. But yeah, he does just tend to say some things that perhaps he shouldn't. He told Shane Woodford before he told me that he wanted to renegotiate CASA, and then didn't tell anyone else that in their year-end interviews. That seems like a big nugget to drop. He told me that he thinks that some of the problems in the early days of the NDP was that John Horgan was, quote, being advised by some people he shouldn't be listening to that he's not listening to anymore. I don't know what that means, but I mean. He didn't want to elaborate on that point, and understandably so. But I mean, that's an interesting thing to learn in an interview.
Okay. Well, the CASA one is interesting. Here's what I think happened there. So I think he starts doing his year-end interviews, and his press secretary probably has lined up like 10 of them or 12 of them over a day. And by the time he sits down with Baldry and Palmer and Shaw and Zuss, and he's going through the list. And by the time he gets to Woodford, he's been asked like 7 times, like, what have you gotten out of this deal? You got nothing out of this deal. What have you gotten out of this deal? You didn't get LNG. You didn't get Site C. You got this proper referendum, but either way, it's in the margin of error. Who knows? Like, what did you get out of it? And so by the time he gets to Woodford, he's like, screw it. We didn't get anything out of this thing. We're renegotiating CASA.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, and in fact, I heard from someone else who interviewed him after me that he enjoys, just on a purely sitting through it perspective, the ones who ask him different questions, and he does get kind of bored giving the same answer over and over again. And you know what? That's understandable, but it's a difficult. Getting bored is a problem in politics. Staying disciplined. It's actually not all. It's like sports, where you've got to kind of give the same pat answer every single time, and it may bore the hell out of you, but I mean, it's a way to stay out of trouble.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. The Wilkinson interview I thought was interesting. I found the behind the scenes of that convention speech, which I think if he does go on to become premier at some point, will be considered a major turning point, within his, definitely a major foundational building block towards securing the support of the party and kind of getting them out of their funk. And look, let's face it, after that convention, they were 1,000 times better in question period. They won that week. Tony Harris is proving to be a very interesting candidate. Like, they seem to be headed in the right direction. But, I did read it, but I didn't. When you read Weaver's stuff, because he's so all over the place, you read every word. You hang on every word because you're like, what is this whack job going to say next, right? Like, is he going to go crazy? Like, what is he going to say? He's throwing secret ballot under the bus, and he's, like, I support secret ballot, but not for crane workers because why, Andrew? Crane workers are less important than average workers, like than office workers, like. Well, and ICBA will do our best to educate the good doctor on that. But you read Wilkinson's, and it's like, everything is. It's not perfect, but everything is just perfectly like what you would expect from Andrew Wilkinson.
There were no surprises in my interview with Wilkinson is a good way of putting it. And I think the closest, as you mentioned, is sort of asking him some of the behind the scenes stuff. And not that it's surprising or even necessarily revealing, but it's just that was the first time I would get an answer where I'd be like, oh, well, actually, I didn't expect you to say that. That's interesting. Whereas with Weaver, it was just constant. I mean, it was just like, wow, okay, can you explain that? Or, well, but previously you said this, so why are you saying this now? And again, to Weaver's credit, he will explain to you at length why he's changed his mind. But I mean, you're right. It's man does like to talk.
Yeah, I think the most underestimated, like, how everyone hangs on Trump tweets? I don't think we do a good enough job hanging on Weaver's blogs, because that's where he unfiltered expounds on why he makes certain decisions. And I disagree with most of his decisions. Certainly the decision to vote with the NDP on every single vote ever. But at the same time, at least I can go there and try to figure out what his rationale is, as skewed and often, poorly thought out as it is. So,
and I do want to highlight one last thing, because we were just talking about PR in my interview with Weaver. Is that I asked him a whole bunch of questions about PR, thinking that he wanted to talk about it at length, because I mean, it was a centerpiece of CASA. This is something that they wanted to impose without a referendum. So I thought understandably that this is very important to him. And like the whole time, and we talked about it for, more than 5 minutes, but he was very sort of, yeah, if it happens, great. In fact, he said this literally, if it happens, great. If it doesn't, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I didn't get into politics because of PR. I mean, my response was, but you made it a condition of supporting the government and wanted to impose it without a referendum, and really And this is, he's just kind of like, It just, and for him to get so animated about something like secret ballot for union certification, which, I don't want to suggest he was like angry or excited. I just meant that he was very engaged and was happy to talk about it at length. But PR, he was just kind of like, it seemed to bore him, the subject. Yeah, again, interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if coming from an academic background, you do the experiment and then the experiment's over.
It's entirely possible.
This campaign was experiment. Now, look, it's going to piss off Sonia Furstenau, who poured her heart and soul into this goofy campaign. But
yeah, she did.
Very interesting. I think it's even money that Furstenau runs as an NDP in the next election anyways, but we'll see. When's the John Horgan year-ender? I'm looking forward to reading that on the Orca.
Oh, well, I am too. You can. It's probably a year from today. Will be our. Look, we did ask for one, and we got an answer back, and I want to emphasize that it was never dismissive. It was very polite and respectful, but the answer was no. And they said no simply because of time. And we are posting tomorrow on the Orca the questions we would have liked to ask the Premier. I think if you read them, and you'll agree, there's nothing untoward there. If you read, for example, Andrew McLeod's year-ender with the Premier and the Tyee, it's almost hostile at times, and that wouldn't have been what we would have done. We would have asked pointed questions, but anyway, we got bumped this year, maybe because we're the new guy, maybe because they figured that was an interview they didn't want to have. But whatever, I have accepted their explanation of they didn't have time at face value, and we will ask very politely again next year, and I will even bring cookies.
Wow! All right, exciting stuff. Other back burner issue for me, Nanaimo by-election seems to be heating up. Here's a date to keep in mind. The second weekend of January, I think it's the 12th and 13th, the NDP have their provincial council meeting in Nanaimo. And that means every riding association president, most of their executive, the treasurers, every MLA, they will all be in Nanaimo. That leads me to think that John Horgan's going to announce the by-election the week before and trigger the 28 days, because they can be on the ground with this whole group of people on January 12th and really swell the ranks for a door-knocking day.
Well, I agree completely. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And not only does it sort of magically put them all in one place to do a big flurry of door knocking, as you say, but it also fits in with their stated goal of having the MLA, whom I'm sure they hope is Sheila Wilkinson, in the legislature in time for the budget, simply because they have to vote for it.
Right. Now, they don't have to be there for the throne. They just have to be there for the vote on the throne.
Exactly, whenever that is, which is that is a little more variable. The vote on the budget tends to be sort of a week or two after budget. So, really, they could get away with not having an MLA there until mid to late February, but I don't think they want to push things that far.
No, I agree. So if we think that the thing is announced on, say, Thursday the 3rd, then 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks later is the 31st of January. That could be, or that first week of February before the throne on the 12th. Anyways, it'll be very interesting times, to say the least. I gotta say, here's a little political prediction. I was surprised that the Greens nominated such a well-known candidate. You'd think they'd want to take it easy and protect their governing coalition with the NDP. I do wonder if she is a bargaining chip, however, for a future CASA. And if I were Andrew Weaver, I would negotiate her out of the race and try to get something that is actually of value to the Green caucus, because the Greens aren't going to win that by-election. Seems to me she'd be an excellent negotiating chip.
She probably can't win that by-election, but she could probably split the vote and influence the results. And I think with Weaver, the other problem is avoiding Nick Clegg syndrome, who was the leader of the Liberal Democrats in the UK. And they entered into a coalition with the Conservatives. And, well, no one talks about the Liberal Democrats anymore. And the Greens are alive to this problem. And that if they are seen or perceived to be just sort of junior NDP members, then eventually their voters are either going to defect to the BC Liberals because they don't like the NDP, or they're just going to vote for the real thing. And that's essentially exactly what happened to the Liberal Democrats. I think Weaver, had he chosen not to run a candidate in Nanaimo, that would kind of cement this impression that he's creating that they are just sort of junior members of the NDP, and so like they had no choice but to find the best candidate they could. And if it means Tony Harris wins the election, then they'll figure that out later.
Absolutely. All right, let's bridge into our who's heating up, who's cooling off segment. I'll start with who's in the cold because I do think it's relevant to Nanaimo, and I think John Horgan is cooling off, and I'm not alone. The Angus Reid Institute today out with their quarterly Premier poll, Premier favorability rating. And in the last one, 4 or 5 months ago, John Horgan had a 52% approval rating. He was up there with the Scott Moes of the world. I don't know why Saskatchewan always loves their premiers. Today, he's down to 43%. He's bled almost 10 points off his approval rating in 5 months. And he's in a statistical tie, an approval rating with one Douglas Ford, Premier of Ontario. Yeah, you heard me, John Horgan's office. I'm comparing you to Doug Ford. You and Doug Ford have the same favorability rating. Think about that when you put your head on your pillow tonight and think about how you duck the Orcas year-end interview.
Well, I mean, you shared this with me before we went on air. I hadn't seen it yet, and I was surprised. I mean, that's a pretty steep drop for a. I mean, let's be fair to him. He's a charismatic guy, and he did win the last election, and the economy is doing well from the on the surface anyway. But there are a lot of problems. There's the Massey Tunnel. There's a lot of his supporters are furious about LNG and Site C, and there's a lot of people in the NDP and who would have supported PR who are upset because they didn't like the process, and they didn't feel they could support a governing party kind of explicitly saying that here's a system that's better for us, which is
gerrymandering.
Exactly. And so, I have spoken to a few NDP supporters who have said that to me. It's not just one or two. It's so I really wanted to vote it for PR, but like you guys made it really hard.
Yeah, I think these slumping poll numbers, and I think they're being reflected in other places as well, it does make me believe that a spring election is probably off the table, barring some Plecus resignation nonsense. Like, I think they'll want to rebuild that back up, and they need to get some of these projects that they promised on stream. Yeah. It just seems to me that, the idea of a spring election when your approval numbers are plummeting, they've plummeted fast enough that they can't get ahead of it, right? Like, let's do it now before we hit 35%. Like, Rachel Notley's at 36. Horgan's already at 43. Well, Rachel Notley.
And this poll would have been taken before, for example, London Drugs announcing they might move because of them too,
before
right? So
Massey,
there's no reason to think the bleeding is going to be stopped over Christmas.
No, exactly. It's before Massey. It's before that. And it's on the heels. Like, what was the last major provincial news story? It might have been LNG Canada. Like, well, I guess the Plecus affair has dominated the news as well.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure people connect Plecus to Horgan in the same way. That's my cold. Your cold is actually has to do with global warming.
Well, I mean, Whistler. It's as you saw, there was a few mayors and councils which decided to try and extort some money from oil and gas companies, citing climate change costs and. I mean, where do you begin? It's Whistler got the most attention, and I think probably most understandably because it was just the most clear-cut case of hypocrisy. Whistler is a resort town, and its lifeblood is people getting there almost exclusively through burning large amounts of automobile and jet fuel to get there and ski. And the mayor of Whistler owns a transportation company.
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't get any more ridiculous than that.
Yes, he is problematic. Like, he's a brand new mayor. This is what happens, right? So you're sitting as a councillor, take it from someone who sat as a councillor. Some group comes in and does a delegation request. You hear them for 5 minutes. This time it's the U.S.-funded whack jobs at the West Coast Environmental Law Society or whatever. They come in, we need your support. 12 other municipalities. They're suing these companies. By the way, very specific companies, not the ones that have historic problems, but whatever. We're suing these companies, and we're going to get back the money for the people. Why are you paying for the the effects of climate change when these oil companies should be doing it? And as a councillor, half a council probably sits there and is like, I just don't care. Like, this is not within our mandate. This is never going to happen. Just stick up your hand and write a letter. But, Whistler got caught because Whistler is different than anywhere else. And Whistler, as much as they talk about sustainability on the mountain, there's no sustainable way to get to the mountain.
There was an interesting little mini blowback here in Victoria, too, where one of the councillors said, okay, you guys talk a really big game on climate change. Let's cancel the downtown parking passes for city council.
Yes.
And the reaction was a collective, well, whoa.
Whoa. That's Jeff Young stirring the pot, I believe, stirring the pot.
Let's not go nuts.
Yeah. Whoa, Younger, what are you doing, buddy?
The great thing is Victoria is not Greater Victoria. Victoria, the city, is very small. It's something like 60,000 people. There is literally not a corner of the city of Victoria, and obviously these councillors all live in the city, where you can't get to City Hall fairly easily, bus, bike, or even walking. For me, it's, a 10-minute walk. And so, I mean, canceling parking passes is not like canceling parking passes in the city of Toronto, where that's probably it. You can't serve on council anymore. Yeah. It's not even an unreasonable proposition, but the response was still, whoa.
Yeah. Victoria's so stupid with the parking. One of my favorite stories of waste stories from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation was the parkade they have where they built a singing handrail on the back of it. And it lights up, and as you put your hand on this handrail, it will light up and make music as you go down, which sounds kind of nifty, except for two things. Number one, who wants to touch a handrail that 1,000 other people have touched on the parkade? Number two, it was on the back side of this parkade overlooking this derelict alley, which was like the least pretty part of Victoria, and we're going to spend $35,000 taxpayer dollars to beautify this handrail. So Victoria always is hilarious for this kind of stuff. By the way, I would challenge, I want to see a mayor and council, or I want to see an oil company sue Whistler, counter sue Whistler and say, you owe us for all the prosperity you've had from oil and gas products over the years. You wouldn't have a tax base if it wasn't for us. You wouldn't have a resort if not for us. We're going to counter sue you. I think that would be hilarious, and I actually think their case might be just as strong as this one, which is to say not strong at all. Okay. Who is hot? We've got two Liberal MLAs. You want to go first, or should I?
I'll go first because mine is probably a little more obscure. It's I'm going to go with Ellis Ross, and it's a sort of counterintuitive, but I'll explain why. Is that until extremely recently, First Nations communities in this country were portrayed as a monolith when it came to natural resource development, and indeed all economic development. The answer was always no, and it was bad for them, and it jeopardized their way of life. And there was a very few voices, 10, 15 years ago, like Ellis Ross, who said, well, no, actually, some of us have a different opinion. And he quietly worked away, for 10 years or more in the Haisla Nation, and then very briefly here as a cabinet minister. And I think increasingly 20 years from now, we're going to look back at people like Ellis Ross and say, you know what, that was you bravely standing up and quietly and respectfully saying, I disagree. That sort of signaled a sea change where we stopped looking at these First Nations communities as like a monolith of opinion, where they have just as many diverging opinions as the rest of us. Of course they do. And for them to suggest that only saying no is the only legitimate way or only legitimate opinion for a First Nations person is in fact very demeaning. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a Lifetime Achievement Award for Ellis, but I've been thinking about that a lot lately and how he was kind of like quietly alone for so many years and now suddenly has a lot more company.
Yeah, it is amazing, even in the media, to see the way the narrative is turned. And you're right, it's kudos to people like Ellis Ross for doing that. I'm going to go with Ellis's House leader, Mary Polak, as the last hottest politician of 2018. Mary, my MLA, incidentally. She has this Daryl Plekas stuff, her role on the LAMC, she has exploded onto the scene in a way that I'm actually shocked. Like, she is doing such an outstanding job at holding the Speaker and the NDP and Greens to account on this thing. Line by line by line yesterday in the budget, she went, or in the budget discussions around the legislature, she went back at these guys, fearlessly trying to dig more information out about what's really happening behind the scenes, trying to find out, how we could, how the committee in good stead, in good reputation, approve a budget for something that, for the legislature when it's under this cloud put there by the speaker. Really amazing work. She may have missed her calling as a lawyer. Like, she has just been picking apart this argument piece by piece. And I've noticed a shift in the narrative as well, even among the media. Her points are so reasonable, and she's been so measured in her tone and careful to make sure, remain professional, but able to dig stuff out of it. I think the media is actually starting to really respect her. I think they're starting to say, hey, wait a minute, she's asking the questions we would ask. And we're starting to see just a little bit less of that. Well, she's only doing it for partisan reasons stuff, which, make no mistake about it, Mary's very partisan. She's doing it for partisan reasons, but that doesn't mean that those partisan reasons are wrong. And so to Mary Polak, I give a hat tip, because you're doing an outstanding job on this LAMC committee.
And to grab on a point that you made there about tone, is that even if you completely believe and accept the NDP's line that this is all a personal vendetta against Darryl Plecas and he's done nothing wrong, and et cetera and so forth, even if you accept that, which I don't, but if you do, I think even then you'd have to appreciate the difference in tone and demeanor that Mary Polak has had when you contrast her, especially with Darryl Plecas, who's lost his temper and been frustrated visibly on more than one occasion, and seemed to get flustered. And even Mike Farnworth, her NDP House Leader counterpart, who is a pro's pro, but has gotten sort of visibly ruffled and upset on more than one occasion. And Mary has just been as steady as a rock. And again, you can disagree with every word she said, and that's fine, but her tone has been remarkably consistent, and my hat's off to her for that.
Yeah, it really has been a remarkable series of performances. And, if you're bored over Christmas, read the Hansard from those LAMC committees. It really is fascinating to see the work she's done and the way that these guys are reacting to her. I noticed yesterday that NDP MLA Gary Begg was kind of pushed forward a little bit more to try to counter her. He's, of course, a former RCMP officer. He's a former Langley RCMP officer. Look, small town Langley, Mary, me, Gary Begg, we all know each other through, different circles. Gary's the kind of guy who could have run for either party. Like, he's not an ideologue like some of these nut bars over there, but he's no Ravi Kahlon, for example. But do you like how I just throw random names out there for you, Maclean, just to see you cringe? He's no nut bar like Bo and Ma, but he's one of the reasonable guys.
Yeah, I agree with you that he is not an ideologue.
Right, and so they kind of pushed him forward, I think, and being an old cop, he's used to these kind of, confrontational situations, I guess, and trying to de-escalate them. I don't think he was terribly effective because, at some point, okay, there's a police investigation going on, but why would that impact, the actual management of the place in the meantime? It doesn't, it shouldn't. They can run concurrently. Nothing that's going to be discussed in LAMC is going to do anything to, harm the case against or the investigation.
We won't know that until we hire yet another lawyer, apparently.
Yeah, well, another lawyer. And until Mr. Plecas gets his $180,000. He's entitled to it. I'm entitled to my entitlement, said the speaker.
I was just about to say that is a dangerous phrase for any politician in this country, because it just never sounds good. Even if it's 100% accurate, it doesn't matter. You just can't say that.
No, I agree. And, I suspect, I don't know this, but I suspect the BC Liberal Oppo guys are, FOIing the heck out of the speaker's expenses and whatnot. And, there's bound to be, like anytime you have expense accounts like that with politicians, there's always something like the pack of gum or the the $2 parking or the $12 taxi ride from. There's always something that you can kind of harp on.
The $15 orange juice.
Yeah. It was $16, and it was a traumatic experience for all of us. By the way, one last thing before we go. Can you believe it's going to take them a decade to redo Centre Block in Ottawa?
I mean, having spent some time in there, I actually can, only because it's extremely old and it was falling apart when I was last there in 2001. And so I think it would probably be easier and faster and probably cheaper to knock the whole thing down and build something else from scratch, but you can't do that. It's iconic, and I don't want them to do that.
calls for House of Commons to be bulldozed here on the BC Poly Hotstove.
I mean, as you with the ICBA probably know, that sometimes demolition and rebuilding is cheaper and faster than extensive renovations, especially with something as rickety and crumbling as the Centre Block has. I mean, there's been scaffolding around that building for 20 years now, and it's because it's a problem. And so I'm actually not shocked that it's going to take that long. And also, you have to take into account the fact that it's Ottawa, and you can only really build about, optimistically, 8 months of the year, because you can't do any construction outdoors when it's minus 40.
Yeah, a decade though. Come on, Maclean, a decade. Now it does beg an interesting question though. Like, what is the condition of the legislature where you are? And God knows, like, if there's ever an earthquake, Vaughn and Keith are dead because they're in that armory. That thing's coming down.
Yeah, it's apparently like the least seismically safe occupied building in the province.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you're on top of the building, not underneath it, like Lisa.
Like I used to be.
Like Lisa and Justine Hunter, Mike and Smitty. Like, God, it was nice.
No, Smitty's up here with me. He's actually adjacent to me.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, so he's going to be one of the survivors.
Okay.
It's,
Don't let them put you in the basement. Don't let them put
just if you're confused, there's the press gallery is not just one room. There's several places throughout the building we are, and I'm up in the top floor, where we can watch the house from above. But there are people in the basement, and should the big one come, that is not where you want to be.
No, for sure. So it was nice knowing them all, but try not to be there. And you just kind of ride the crumbling infrastructure down, Maclean.
What a perfect note to end our Christmas edition.
Perfect. Well, we're really cheerful here. Massey. We started with the Massey tunnel, splitting an earthquake and killing thousands, and now we're ending with the legislature coming down. What a world we live in. No, on a serious note, folks, Merry Christmas to all of you. Thanks for all your support of the Orca, for watching the show, for reading our stuff, for clicking the links. It would be look. I like talking to Maclean, and I would talk to him, with or without an audience. But it's certainly more fun when we have people watching. And Maclean, to you, Merry Christmas to you and your lovely family. Have a wonderful time off. Maybe you should lay out the schedule for what we're doing on the Orca, because I don't want to write anything until the new year.
Well, I am going away basically this weekend until the New Year's. We do have a few pieces that have been pre-written by some of our contributors, and we'll space them out throughout the break. But you will see us basically go dark on social media. You won't see anything from me. Yes, even if PR comes on the 27th, sorry, but I'll be in Banff. And so on behalf of me and all of the contributors, and of course to you, Jordan, a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and I look forward to seeing you all next year.
All right, and we will reconvene. I don't know. You're back the 2nd?
I am. We can do any time you want on that first week.
All right, let's plan for the 3rd, and then I think Rick Clough is doing his next series of tapings on the 9th. So
that's right.
That'll fill the video gap until Rick comes back and straightens us out.
Look forward to it.
Awesome. Everyone, take care. Have a great Christmas.